Have you ever thought that something as simple as a knock on the door could mean the world to someone? As a judge, I've spent over 40 years observing the complexities of human nature in the courtroom. I've seen it all: grief, despair, joy, and triumph. Families torn apart, old wounds reopened, and the quiet sadness in the eyes of elderly men and women who've spent too much time alone. In all that time, I have learned that the most profound moments of justice don't always come from a judge's bench, but from ordinary people in the most unexpected places. Let me share with you a story. It begins not in a courtroom, but in a small, unassuming home during a bitter November night. Marcus was a 22-year-old college student working a part-time food delivery job to cover his tuition fees. It was a cold Tuesday evening, the kind of night when you just want to finish your shift and curl up in bed. The rain was coming down hard, the wind bitter and cold, and Marcus was desperate to finish his last delivery. He followed the directions on his GPS, pulling up to a small house at 402 Maple Street. As he stepped out into the rain, he barely noticed how dilapidated the house appeared. Its paint chipped, the porch steps uneven, the dim light barely illuminating the old wooden door. Marcus knocked. This, he thought, would be a quick delivery, and then he could head home. But what he didn't know, what no GPS or printed receipt could tell him, was that the elderly woman who lived behind that door was someone in desperate need of human contact. Her name was Eleanor. She was 78 years old. Her husband had passed away 6 years ago, and her children had long since moved across the country. Eleanor was completely alone. The world outside was moving faster than she could keep up with, and her life had narrowed to a small, cold house filled with memories. The warmth of human connection had long since slipped away. In fact, Eleanor hadn't heard the sound of a visitor's voice in 3 weeks. No one had knocked on her door, no one had checked in. And so, on that fateful night, when Marcus's knock echoed in the silence, Eleanor was startled. She slowly got to her feet, feeling the stiff ache in her bones. When she opened the door, Marcus was standing there, drenched to the bone, holding a warm bag of food in his hands. "Here's your dinner, ma'am," he said, in the usual mechanical tone of someone who had been working for hours. But something in Eleanor's eyes shifted. She saw that young man standing there in the rain, and in that moment, something inside her stirred. She wasn't expecting a meal. She wasn't expecting anything. But the simple sound of a stranger's voice cut through the years of isolation she had endured. "You've got the wrong house," she said softly, her voice shaking. "But would you stay for just a moment? It's been so long since I heard a real human voice." Marcus stood there, his mind racing with the choice before him. He could have turned around, followed his delivery instructions, and walked away. There was no obligation for him to stay, no reason to engage. But in that brief moment, he made a decision that would change everything. As a judge, I often say that the most telling moments in someone's character come when they think no one is watching, when there is no reward, when the easiest choice is to walk away. What Marcus did in that moment wasn't just a decision to stay with an elderly woman. It was a choice that revealed the deepest part of his character. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I think this order was canceled by the customer. It's a large portion of hot stew and some fresh bread. I haven't eaten yet myself. If you wouldn't mind the company, maybe we could share it." Eleanor's frail hands gripped the doorframe, and she looked at him with gratitude so deep it was almost painful. A tear slipped down her cheek, tracing the lines of a life that had once been full of love and laughter. Her eyes spoke 1,000 words. "Yes," she whispered, "I'd like that very much." Marcus stepped inside, crossing the threshold from the cold, harsh world of transactions into the quiet, sacred space of human compassion. Eleanor's house, though cold, felt like the only home he had ever known in that moment. They sat at her small dining table, and he began to unpack the meal, letting the steam rise between them like the bridge of connection he had just crossed. As they ate, Eleanor began to speak, not about her aches or her loneliness, but about the life she had lived. The days when her home had been filled with laughter, when her children played in the yard, when she and her husband shared their dreams together. With every word, a piece of her, long buried under grief and isolation, began to return to life. In the courtroom, I see many who come to me with their cases, defendants, plaintiffs, people in pain. But what I've learned over the years is that the true measure of a person is in their ability to listen, to see the humanity in others, especially when it costs them nothing. Marcus didn't rush. He didn't check his phone, didn't worry about his next delivery. He listened. He stayed present, asking Eleanor questions about her life, about her roses, about the table her husband had built. He wasn't just sharing a meal, he was validating her life, her memories, and her worth. We live in a world obsessed with speed, with achieving, with getting things done. But sometimes the greatest act of justice is simply to show up, to give someone your time when they have nothing else to offer. Marcus gave Eleanor a gift that no court could ever decree. He gave her dignity. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus continued to visit Eleanor. They shared more meals. He helped her with the yard, sat with her during the long winter afternoons, and in return, Eleanor gave him something more precious than he could have ever expected: wisdom, perspective, and a deep, comforting peace. But there was one moment, one promise that I will never forget. Eleanor, sitting at the same table where they had shared so many meals, looked at Marcus with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "My greatest fear is that I will disappear and no one will even notice. I fear that I'll be forgotten." In her words, I heard the deep, silent cry of so many elderly people in our society, people who feel invisible, people who have given so much only to be cast aside in their later years. But Marcus did something incredible. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, grounding her in that simple human gesture. "You are not forgotten," he said. "I'll be back next week. We can work in the garden. I'll help you with those weeds." That promise, that simple, selfless act was more than just words. It was a lifeline. And when Marcus came back week after week, he showed Eleanor that she was not alone. He was reminding her that despite the years, despite the loneliness, she still had value. She still mattered. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's visits became a cherished ritual. But something profound happened, something that no one expected. Eleanor, the frail widow who had once felt forgotten, began to change. She started baking again. She started talking to her neighbors. She even looked forward to her weekly visits with Marcus, who by simply showing up, gave her a reason to live. It wasn't just about the yard work. It wasn't just about the meal. It was about showing up time after time with no expectations. It was about the quiet act of making someone feel seen. As a judge, I've seen many cases, many broken lives. But Marcus and Eleanor's story taught me a profound truth. Real justice isn't always about laws or verdicts. Sometimes it's about showing up. It's about giving someone your time when they have nothing to offer you in return. Today, 4 years later, Marcus walks across the stage to receive his diploma. And sitting in the front row, cheering the loudest, is Eleanor. The woman who once felt forgotten, whose life had seemed to end, is now a proud witness to a young man's success, a success that began not with a grand gesture but with a simple, compassionate choice. In the end, we don't need laws to tell us how to be human. We don't need a courtroom to understand what justice is. All we need is the willingness to show up, to be present, to care. Marcus didn't just change Eleanor's life that day, he changed his own, and in doing so, he reminded us all of the incredible power of human connection. Thanks for listening to me.